And Judith. There we go. We're in the month of Elul. We blow shofar in the month of Elul to get us ready for the high holy days. Judith so graciously said she would blow shofar for us. So we're going to do a few shofar blows and introduce Roger. Are you ready, Judith? Yes. Tekiah. Shvarim. Teruah. Tekiah Gedolah. Yasher Koach. And on to our introduction. What a great way to start our morning.
Okay. So I am so delighted to introduce you to Roger Pines, one of the foremost opera experts. Roger recently retired after 26 years working for Lyric Opera of Chicago as dramaturg, commentator for opening night live broadcasts, program editor, and lecturer. He's also been a featured speaker across the U.S. and internationally and has been a familiar voice on the Metropolitan Opera Opera Quiz broadcasts. He held positions with a number of other opera companies and has been a judge for numerous prestigious vocal competitions. Roger is currently a freelance lecturer on all things opera and is in his third year as lecturer teaching opera repertoire at Northwestern's Bynum School of Music. Not part of his official bio, but important to me is, I'm sorry, I have to get the rest. Okay, important to me is that Roger has a beautiful countertenor voice and was my duet partner singing Stephen Richards' setting of the Prayer with Say for Days of All Services at Or Chadash. Welcome, Roger. We look forward to what you have to share with us about the glory of Jewish voice in opera.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Judith. All right, I'm going to share screen.
I didn't know you could sing, Roger. You next time you come to us, you're going to have to sing. Sing for your breakfast.
All right, here we go. Share sound and let's see. Does everybody see it?
Yes, perfect.
All right, here we go. Over the past 200 years, there have always been well-known Jewish singers in opera, and they've made a huge impact out of proportion to their numbers. I can't give you all of them in an hour, of course, but I think I have a representative sample of some of the greatest. Many of them date from the second half of the 20th century and had everything to do with altering our idea of what an opera singer is through the sheer force of their personalities and the brilliance of their artistry. I've found that the singers I'll be playing for you all share a particular quality which I can only call sincerity. Their music making is unfussy. There's nothing phony about it. It's direct and honest, it has conviction, it has heart. They also sing words as if they truly mean them, no matter how extravagant the sentiments may be. In many cases, these singers experience tough times. Their success did not always come easily. And as a result, I think they felt an extraordinary gratitude for the gift of a voice and a passionate desire to share that voice with the public. Now let's do play. There you go. Okay. The earliest Jewish opera singers that we know much about were two of the legendary figures of the 19th century singing. An Italian, Giuditta Pasta, has often been talked about as the Maria Callas of her time, a woman with a voice that did her bidding only by sheer force of will, but an artist who sang everything with an expressiveness that was unique. She was a true singing actress and a muse of the greatest composers of Italian opera of her time, Vincenzo Bellini and Gaetano Donizetti. Her voice deteriorated too soon, like Callas's, but her artistry remained. Then Pauline Lucca, who was Austrian and was even more famous for her temperament than she was for her singing. She's a huge star in Berlin and Vienna. Although she was a soprano rather than a mezzo-soprano, she was one of the first truly successful Carmens. She had a 2.5 octave range, and her repertoire really ran the gamut of roles. Now, back then, the divas wielded all the power in the opera business and could basically sing whatever they wanted. Now, with the dawn of recording, we can finally listen to Jewish singers, beginning with Hermann Jadlofker. He was from Latvia. He came from a middle-class Jewish family, started his professional singing life as a cantor, but decided to move into opera. His businessman father disapproved, so he ran away to Vienna, studied singing, and launched a stage career. He spent a great deal of the career in Vienna, Berlin, and especially at the Metropolitan Opera, where he sang a massive repertoire. He didn't return to being a cantor until 1929, after he'd called a halt to his operatic singing. Growing up, no doubt he learned hugely from the great cantors that he heard, because he developed the most astounding ability to move his voice quickly and accurately through the most complicated florid passages, just as great cantors have to do as a matter of course. Jadlofker's most famous recording comes from 1917. This is the fiercely aggressive aria sung by the King of Crete, who is the title character of Mozart's Idomeneo, which Jadlofker sang in German translation. Listen to the speed and clarity of his singing, and listen to his spectacular trill. Good trills have been rare among male singers, even the greatest, throughout the history of singing. Although Alma Gluck practiced Episcopal Christianity later,
Roger,
yes?
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. Do you intend for us to still be looking at your introduction slide?
My introduction slide,
We
no.
just have the title slide here that we've been looking at all this time.
Oh, you're kidding.
No.
Oh my gosh. All right, well, let me stop share and start again. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me just start share screen. Okay. There.
And
Okay.
you're sharing optimized for sound, right?
Yes. Do you
Okay,
see
good.
Alma Gluck now?
Now we do see Alma Gluck.
Okay.
We're seeing it in your, where we've got all the film strip on the left and then the
Yes.
slide in the middle,
Well,
which is fine.
Yeah, I think we better stick with that then.
Okay.
Okay. So, we did Hermann. Now let's go to Alma. Okay. So although she practiced Episcopal Christianity later in life, she was born Jewish. Her real name was Reba Feinsohn. She emigrated as a child with her family from Romania to New York, and eventually came to the Met, where she sang for just a few seasons. But she was even more successful in concerts than in opera. Now, at her peak in the mid-1910s, she was actually the most popular concert singer across America. She was really a natural. I mean, singing came to her as easily as breathing. She could take a song as simple as Carry Me Back to Old Virginia and make something truly exquisite out of it. But we're talking about opera today, so I want to give you one of her musical signatures and one of the greatest tests of a singer's breath control in all of Baroque music. The hero Meleagre's aria Cariselve from Handel's Atalanta, which Alma Gluck always sang in English. It's a bit difficult to hear the words. Now, what she's singing is, gentle zephyrs fan her, banish love's alarms, tell her how I languish here, guide me safely to her arms. Let's see if now we go from a soprano to a bass. Alexander Kipnis, one of the great singers of the 20th century, who grew up involved in the life of his synagogue. He was born in a ghetto in Ukraine, and he sang in synagogue choirs from his boy soprano days right into his early years as a bass. He moved from the Warsaw Conservatory to Berlin for further studying, and after World War I, his career began in German opera houses. But the world was soon hearing about him, and he became a star all over Europe, as well as in Buenos Aires, in Chicago, and then finally, when already in his 40s, at the Met. For me, he was the greatest bass who's ever recorded. If the Almighty could sing, this is what he would sound like. Alexander Kipnis was the ultimate in sheer majesty, but in music like this, he could also break your heart. It's the lament of an inconsolable father after his daughter's death. And this is the opening scene of Verdi's Simon Boccanegra. Rosa Raiza was another singer who, like Alma Gluck, felt unable to use her real name on stage. She was born Raiza Burstein in Białystok, Poland. If she had not escaped the pogroms in Poland, the world would never have heard her voice. She made it to Italy, and before long was having her voice trained by a great teacher and former diva who had known and worked with Rossini. She was lucky to meet a particularly influential conductor who brought her to America when she was all of 20 years old. Although she never sang at the Met, she was an enormous star here in Chicago and in Italy as well, where she created the title role of Puccini's Turandot at La Scala in Milan. To the end of her career, she was passionately devoted to Jewish causes and often sang benefit concerts for Jewish organizations. Raiza's voice was enormous. It had a power that was by all accounts unique, even among the great dramatic sopranos of her time. And that kind of voice is always tough to capture on records. But here is one of her best. It's the despairing aria Suicidio, sung by the heroine of Ponchielli's La Gioconda. It was inevitable that there would be many Jewish singers whose careers, and in some cases whose lives, were cut tragically short by the Nazis. And one of the most devastating losses for anyone who loved great singing was the early death of Josef Schmidt. He was from what was then Austria-Hungary. Like Kipnis, he essentially grew up in the synagogue and worked with great cantors. He must have absorbed a great deal from them because he developed a superhuman vocal technique. He found a teacher in Berlin to give the final polish to his singing, and from the moment he began performing on the radio, he was a sensation. He was only 4'11" tall, so that kept him from singing opera live on stage, but he made 9 movies, and he sang concerts in Holland, Belgium, and Switzerland that became legendary. He did sing briefly in America, and as the Nazis rose to power, he tried to emigrate here, and he also tried Cuba, but in both attempts, he was unsuccessful. He was caught in France and eventually interned in a refugee camp in Switzerland. He was released, but his health was failing, and he died at an inn in Switzerland of a heart attack. He was only 38 years old. He had a truly phenomenal voice. It was shining, it was effortless, it had an enormous range. It wasn't just a great sound. He sang with tremendous heart, with joy, and surprisingly, as if he hadn't a care in the world. It was what the great American soprano Rosa Poncel once said about Enrico Caruso. It was a voice that loved you. He was a fabulous linguist, easily able to sing in at least 6 languages. This is the theme song in English from one of Schmidt's movies, My Song Goes Round the World.
I sing a song, the whole day long, just one song that's in my mind. It's a melody, it's haunting me, every night and day I find it echoes in my soul live. All things and
Isn't that something? Wow. By there was a generation of American Jewish singers who made their mark at the Met in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. They were all intensely observant Jews who were beloved in the Jewish community, not only in New York, but around the country. I wanted to give you just a taste of what those singers were like. By any standards, Regina Resnick had a unique career. She was a native New Yorker and was a full-fledged dramatic soprano at the Met in her mid-20s. Yeah. After 11 years in that repertoire, she reworked her voice and became a leading dramatic mezzo-soprano. Eventually, she moved into character parts, so she prolonged her performing career very significantly. While she was still singing, she became a successful opera director, and then she became a filmmaker. She made a brilliant documentary about the historic Jewish ghetto of Venice. And in her late 60s, she found a whole new performing life doing musical theater in New York, co-starring in revivals of A Little Night Music and Cabaret. She had charisma to burn, and she had a rich, velvety sound in roles like Carmen, which was a specialty of hers.
Il n'a jamais, jamais connu de loi. Si tu ne m'aimes pas, je t'aime. Si je t'aime, prends garde à toi. Si tu ne m'aimes pas, si tu ne m'aimes pas, je t'aime. Mais si je t'aime, si je t'aime,
and when the voice descended into an almost baritonal sound when she was in her late 60s, it was still rock steady and it was still colorful. So here she is lending a real touch of class to her role as Madame Armfeldt in A Little Night Music, in which I think she was really definitive.
At the villa of the Baron de Signac, where I spent a somewhat infamous year. At the villa of the Baron de Signac, I had ladies in attendance, fire opal pendants, liaisons, what's happened to them? Liaisons today, disgraceful. What's become of them? Some of them hardly pay their shoddy way.
Roger, we have a quick question from Ed. Ed, go ahead. Ed.
I had no question.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Continue on.
Okay. Let's move to Robert Merrill, whose real name was Moishe Miller. And he was in the royal line of great American baritones. It was one of the glories of the Met for 31 consecutive seasons. He was as much at ease singing the national anthem at Yankees games, which he did for years, as he was singing Figaro and Rigoletto on stage at the Met. And we have Roberta Peters, whose real name was Roberta Peterman, and she was at the Met at age 20 and became its best-loved high soprano of the 1950s. Now, in the course of her long career, she did everything. Starring roles in opera and operetta on stage at the Met and throughout the country, musical theater roles in summer stock, a movie, even an episode of the TV drama Medical Center, in which by all accounts, she gave a beautiful performance playing a dying opera singer. Peters and Merrill were married early in their careers for only a few months, but they remained close colleagues. So here they are in one of their specialties, the Rosina Figaro duet from The Barber of Seville, which was a huge success for them at the Met and on records.
Senti, manto, qui verrà, a momenti per parlarlo qui sarà.
Then there were two tenors who married two sisters. Jan Peerce and Richard Tucker shared more than that family connection. They both changed their names for show business purposes. Peerce was originally Jacob Pincus Perelmuth. Tucker was originally Reuben Ticker. They both had extensive cantorial experience prior to moving into opera, and that definitely, I think, had a lot to do with their brilliant technique. And it also gave them the gift of singing from their depths with soul and with passion. They both had the distinction of singing in legendary operatic concerts conducted by the great Arturo Toscanini, who had the highest possible musical standards. Tucker and Peerce were both short in stature, and they weren't really actors on stage, although Tucker's acting ability was transformed later in his career when he sang Pagliacci on stage for the first time. But both Peerce and Tucker acted with the voice, and their commitment to every single phrase they sang was total. They both were already into their 30s when they finally debuted at the Met, where they became huge favorites, Peerce for 27 years and Tucker for 29. They were devoted to their Judaism and to the Jewish community their entire lives. They continued to sing in the synagogue. Tucker was actually famous in Chicago, not just for his performances at Lyric, but for singing the high holidays at synagogues here. They both recorded a good deal of sacred and secular Jewish music. Their careers were also thriving at a time.
Remember that.
Sorry, what was that? Nothing. Their careers were also thriving at a time when major tenors were asked for a good deal of light music on records, everything from If Ever I Would Leave You to O Sole Mio. Now, after Peerce left opera in the mid-1960s, he continued to perform in concert halls everywhere. I went to one of his recitals when I was a child, and I'll never forget him singing a song that he made famous, a song that ended all of his recitals. That was The Bluebird of Happiness. Peerce also made a success on Broadway as the last of the 7 performers who played Tevye in the original run of Fiddler on the Roof. There isn't much film of him that we have, but I found him in a wonderful song from the Victor Herbert operetta, Eileen.
I'm alone. Thy love bears a spell, all too wondrous to tell. 'Tis a rapture that's already mine. So within thy tender arms enfold me, for thy loss the world could not have done. Beloved, I swear that I will ever be true, and forever thine
Let's see, here we go. On stage, Richard Tucker didn't do any musical theater as far as I know. He stuck with opera. He sang a repertoire that was a bit more dramatic than Peerce's. His crowning achievement was a role that would have been too heavy for Peerce. The only Jewish protagonist that I know of in any important 19th century opera, Eleazar in Halévy's La Juive, which Tucker sang in Barcelona, in London, and New Orleans. If he had lived a couple of years longer, he would have fulfilled his lifelong ambition in opera, which was to sing that role at the Met. Unfortunately, we don't have film of him as Eleazar, but here he is in one of his musical signatures, Rodolfo's aria from Puccini's La Bohème, with Anna Maffo as his Mimi. George London was yet another Jewish singer who felt compelled to change his name as he began building his career. He was born George Bernstein in Canada. He grew up in California, and he first attracted attention as a member of a touring group called the Bel Canto Trio with the soprano Frances Yen and the still unknown Mario Lanza. By the time he was 27, London was already at the Vienna State Opera, where he became the first North American singer to be totally idolized by the Viennese public. He was triumphant at the Met as well, and he was even welcomed at the Bolshoi in Moscow as the first American to sing Boris Godunov there. It looked like he was going to be the preeminent interpreter of the most dramatic bass baritone parts well into the 1970s. But alas, he was diagnosed with a paralyzed vocal cord from which he never recovered. And his singing career ended in 1967 when he was only 46 years old. What Alexander Kipnis was to basses, George London was to bass baritones. He had what we might call a column of sound, totally consistent from top to bottom, matchlessly dark, warm, house-filling sound. Like Kipnis, he was also a singer whose voice you could recognize in a single note. It was that distinctive. He was a theater animal as well. He had stupendous intensity and consuming theatrical involvement. I was excited to find this performance of Iago's Vicious Credo from Verdi's Otello on video. So I wanted to share a portion of it with you.
Io penso e chi da me procede per mio destino adempio. Spero che il giusto è un istrion beffardo e nel viso nel cuor e tutto in lui bugiardo lacrima quattro sguardo sacrificio e dolor. E credo all'uom già
At the time of London, Tucker, Peerce, Merrill, Peters, there was at least one great Jewish singer who did not come from North America, and that was the wonderful Israeli soprano Netanya Devrat. After she studied in Israel, Germany, Italy, and America, she quickly made her name singing some opera, but really attracting major attention in concerts where she earned her greatest acclaim. To my surprise, I've read that in 1971, she scored a triumph in one of the most grand scale and powerfully dramatic roles in contemporary opera, Magda Sorel in Menotti's The Consul, which she sang in Israel. She worked with many of the greatest conductors and built up a captivating discography that took in everything from Bach to folk songs. She was able to sing easily in at least 8 languages. Her voice was unlike that of any other prominent singer of classical repertoire performing at the time. It was, first of all, piercingly, almost achingly pure. It had a kind of simplicity about it. For many people, it sounded totally natural and even untrained in a way that a young girl's voice would be. But of course, she had total control over it technically, and she was an intensely musical, acutely responsive interpreter in everything she sang. I can't find any video of Devrat in opera, but there's a classic performance of a piece that she frequently sang, and that was Villalobos's Bacchiana Brasileira No. 5. She sang it on television with Leonard Bernstein in the New York Philharmonic. I wanted to include 2 sections of it, the famous opening theme, and then its return, which the soprano is required to hum, which Devrat does really beautifully. Wow. During Netanya Devrat's heyday, a very different type of light soprano was holding forth with New York City Opera, where she was the reigning diva, and that was Beverly Sills. American trained, when she eventually performed in Europe, she performed as a star. She was also Brooklyn born and raised, child of a Romanian Jewish father and a Russian Jewish mother. She announced when she was about 4 that she was going to be not just a singer, but a star. Her name was originally Belle Silverman, but when she was 7, a friend changed the name to Beverly Sills because she thought it would look better on a marquee. She came from parents who encouraged accomplishment in their children, and she had the successful lawyer brother and the successful doctor brother to prove it. She sang on the radio as a child. She was touring nationally in operetta in her teens. And she didn't actually become a star until she'd actually been singing with the New York City Opera for 11 years. She didn't sing at the Met until well into her 40s. She ended her operatic career by going back to the New York City Opera to be its general director. In her years of fame, she wasn't simply a superstar. She was the best known of all female singers of her time, with her face on magazine covers and frequent appearances on television. For a while, she had her own TV show on NBC, which was called Lifestyles with Beverly Sills. Hers was also an important human interest story in that offstage, she had a deaf daughter and a profoundly disabled son. Like the Jewish opera stars who preceded her, she cared deeply about Jewish causes, even if she wasn't a fervent synagogue attendee. The point was, she was brought up with Jewish values and they governed her life. By the way, she was invited to sing in Israel for the first time in 1970, and her mother said to her, "Fine, but do the concerts for free. No nice Jewish girl takes money out of Israel." And she did as she was told. Sills had a bright, sunny voice, and it could move. One critic called it the fastest voice in the West. She sang a lot of intensely dramatic roles in Italian and French opera, but she was always best in lighter music. Once she began concentrating on 19th century Italian operas from the bel canto repertoire, an aria that quickly became closely associated with her was the heroine's joyful entrance scene, O luce di quest'anima, from Donizetti's rarely heard opera, Linda di Chamounix.
Su questo cor che t'ama, che ti sospetta brama, che bello che soffrirà.
The great Jewish tenor of the post-Tucker Peerce generation has been Neil Shikoff. Like Sills, he is a native New Yorker. His father was a cantor, Sidney Shikoff. On the basis of the few recordings that the elder Mr. Shikoff made, which are on YouTube, I think I found 2 of them, he certainly sounds to me like one of the most outstanding cantors of the 20th century. Now, Neil came up through Juilliard and through the Met's Young Artist program. His potential was stupendous, and he was pushed pretty hard, pretty fast, including singing Verdi with James Levine conducting when he was only 25. But he survived vocally, and he found his way, especially in the big French romantic parts that became his signature. He sang at all the major opera houses internationally. Now, like Richard Tucker, Neil's lifelong ambition was to sing Eleazar in La Juive. He sang it first in Vienna, where he was a huge favorite, in Venice, and also at the Met, which Tucker never got to do. Neil did speak with me at length for a magazine article about the role of Eleazar. That role fulfilled him as an artist in a way that no other role did. I hesitated to play this for you because his conductor adopts a very, very slow tempo in the aria. And this is also a video with Spanish subtitles, but Neil's intensity is so remarkable that I thought you needed to see and hear him in it. This is the aria where Eleazar is singing about Rachel, the girl that he's raised as his daughter. The all-powerful cardinal has condemned her to death for consorting with a Christian prince who's in love with her. What the cardinal doesn't realize is that she's actually his own daughter, whom Eleazar saved from a fire years before and raised as his own. And of course, he raised her Jewish. But Eleazar knows that he can save Rachel by revealing her true identity. but he's unable to reconcile his own Jewish faith while forcing his daughter to change hers. So here is the last portion of Eleazar's big aria. Wow. I wanted very much to include in this talk a real contralto. And I chose Batya Godfrey Ben David, who has a special connection to Chicago as the mother of Temple Sholom's cantor Shira Ben David. Batya trained at Juilliard, and a huge moment for her early on was singing with Leonard Bernstein at Tanglewood, portraying Mercedes in a concert performance of Carmen. Now, just a few years after graduating from Juilliard, she was in Switzerland singing the featured role of Erda in Das Rheingold when she got the call to return to America to audition for the Met. Now, beginning in 1969, she sang there for 20 seasons. Of course, family mattered very deeply to her, and her association with the Met allowed her to stay in New York and raise her children while continuing her singing career at the same time. Now, name any celebrated singer of the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, and it's likely that Batya sang with them at the Met. Many of her more than 25 Met roles were crucial in those operas, both dramatically and musically, whether Maddalena in Verdi's Rigoletto, Filipievna in Tchaikovsky's Eugene Onegin, the innkeeper in Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov, or Mrs. Sedley in Britten's Peter Grimes. In all of her Met roles, Batya's voice instantly attracted the audience's attention. She was a true contralto, the real rare thing. And her voice has a particularly striking timbre with terrific depth and color. So when Wagner's music needed an authoritative, all-knowing voice from above in Parsifal, or when Strauss's music needed the same thing in Die Frau ohne Schatten, the Met had in Batya exactly the right singer. This recording was actually made in her living room with piano, and you'll recognize the song.
When you walk through a storm, put your head up high, and don't be afraid of the dark.
it. I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you very, very much. I think I'm going to have to call a halt now. But Vanessa, I have a suggestion, which is if anybody has any questions, you can most certainly give everybody my email address, and I would be more than happy to reply. And I could probably reply more in depth in that way.
Right.
So,
I have one quick question about Andrew Foldy, a bass who sang character roles.
I heard him on stage. I remember him
Okay.
very well. Yes.
And there we have the one question that I got in the chat. What a great presentation.
Thank you.
We'll have to have you back in person.
Thank you.
And
I
then
would
you'll
love
have
that.
to stay for all the questions.
I
You're
would
getting,
love that.
it was beautiful. What great inspiration to take us into the high holy days.
Thank you
Thank
ever
you,
so
Judith.
much.
Thank you, Roger. Great,
Care.
great morning. And we're off next week, and we'll see everybody at High Holy Days.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Great session.
Thank you.
Very good, Vanessa.
This is the best comment. Loved your presentation, and I don't even like opera. Thank you, Bill. Okay, bye-bye,
So
everyone.
much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.